Our reading this morning comes from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 6 to 12. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rearguard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, "Here am I." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen.
So our verse today is believed to be written at a time when Israel are fasting twice a year, and they've been doing this for 70 years. They fast to commemorate the fact that they were in exile. It was a fast to say, "Hear us, God, give us justice, rebuild our temple." And I'm sure when they started, they were eager to fast and took it really seriously. But after time, it's become a bit more of a chore, a last hope, that for some they probably only do because their family have told them to, and they don't even remember the reasons. And so instead of fasting and praying and using their time to seek God's face and his wisdom, they're actually exploiting each other. They're fighting, they're arguing. They're really not listening. And they're not listening to why they're fasting. And importantly, they kind of have forgotten how they should be fasting. And so there's this picture built of a people who are kind of half-heartedly crying out to God, but yet expecting him still to step in and sort it out, even though they don't really mean it, or they've kind of just forgotten the reasons behind it. And so we come to the verses that James just read, where God is stepping in and saying, "Hang on a minute, guys. You're asking me to save you. You're fasting from food twice a year, but within that time you can't even treat each other properly. Have you forgotten what fasting is really about? Have you forgotten what it means to be God's people?" It's reminiscent for me of so many stories in the Bible where the people have lost their way, where they've forgotten what it means to follow God, where they've forgotten the way they were called to live. And so we come to the reading, and it says again in verse 6, "Is this not the kind of fasting I've chosen? To loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not turn away from your own flesh and blood." In these verses, God reprimands and reminds them what it means to be children of God. It's not about oppression, it's about freedom. It's not about looking holy, it's about acting justly. They've already been warned at the start of Isaiah that they need to rescue the oppressed. They need to defend the orphan. They need to plead for the widow. But they seem to have forgotten that. And so here they are, willing to look religious, to observe the fast twice a year so that God might step in. But perhaps not so willing to get up and act on the call God has given them, to go out and care for the broken in their communities, to change the way they see their faith from being a religious act to a practically lived out faith. I was sat in a room recently where someone took it upon themselves to boast about their prayer meeting and their house group and how so many people are coming to their church on a Sunday. They then went on to say, we need to be wary of these so-called churches that act more like charities with their social projects and social agendas. They proclaim loudly, this person proclaimed loudly, that the only thing a church should be doing is opening doors and preaching a message of Jesus. We don't need to rest, they said. Or we don't need the rest, sorry, they said. They then looked at me and said, people don't need charities, they need churches. I immediately felt a little bit attacked and had to pause for a moment and carefully consider what they were saying and my response. So I gave a good thoughtful, interesting, as I didn't want to jump in and defend what we're doing without thinking it through. But whilst the person is right to say we need churches to be preaching the message of Jesus, in my opinion, he had totally missed the point. You see, what I read in the Bible and in these verses is that we need both faith and works. We can't have one without the other. It's not a case of we're either a church or a charity. We're either religious or social. We need to be meeting both the physical and the spiritual needs of our community. And in fact, as we do one, it should compel us to do the other, because they aren't mutually exclusive. Jesus fed the hungry. He brought healing to the blind. He cared for people's physical needs. And then he introduced them to the Father. Then he brought them into a new relationship with him. We see Jesus teaching that we should care for people through many of the parables in the Bible, through feeding 4,000 people, through feeding 5,000 people, through healing people, through talking to people and showing care for the broken and the afflicted. We read in Matthew 25, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick and in prison and visit you? And the king replies, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Jesus is teaching the importance of caring for the social needs of others, with an encouragement that when we do that, we're not just caring for the person, we're caring for one of God's beloved creations, and so we're serving him in those moments. Yeah, I've been really challenged over the last 4 or so years through some key discussions that I've had, and it crops up quite regularly with members in the community, where they've said something like, you're a Christian type thing, aren't you? Or, you're like a vicar, is that right? Or, you're a bit religious, aren't you? Okay, then answer me this. How can there be a God who cares about me when I can't even feed my family? When I have to choose to either pay for heating or pay for food? There just can't be a God who would let me struggle like that. In one case, a gentleman came in I'd never spoken to before, and he said, "Don't try and tell me there's a God. There can't be, so I don't want to hear it." And you don't know him, but that sounds just like him. It's an amazing... He then explained his life story to me. And do you know, I could understand why he felt like that. I could understand where he was coming from and why he would believe there is no God. Why would it even matter to him? Why nobody cares for him? That's how he felt. And his story kind of backed that up. And I find it heartbreaking that here in our part of the country, in, let's be honest, beautiful middle-class East Devon, we're struggling with food poverty to such an extent. I started this year really wanting to think carefully about what we do and make sure that we don't just become a social action charity. So, whilst there is a great need for social action charities, we're a church and we're passionate about sharing the message of Jesus with the people in Littleham. The problem is, it would be really easy for me to rest on the good works of our projects and allow them to be the focus of all of my time. I could quite easily be just another charity, like that person mentioned the other day. After all, running a community garden and a community kitchen and a community cafe and a community fridge do take quite a lot of my time. Even without considering all the time I spend hunting for grants and applying for money and seeking to develop what we're doing and make sure that we're meeting the needs of those that come. And all the volunteers, I think we're up to about 25 volunteers across the projects at the moment. And that's amazing, but we need some more. And I spend a lot of time trying to work out how to manage those volunteers. And I can tell you, I'm not a great manager of volunteers. And I was recently denied some funding because we're too Christian. And I had a phone call with the person who said, "I've read your website. If you could just tweak it a little bit, we could give you some money." And it's these kind of things that could start to tempt, couldn't they? That could start to get me thinking, well, if I just slip on that a little bit and get rid of a bit of the Christian side of what we do, then we'd have more money to do more great things. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Or, well, actually, what if we did just become a charity and forget the church side of it? I'd have so much more time to input into the community. But where I've come to in that is God didn't call me to run a social action project. He called me to lead a church that would reach out to those in the community that, for whatever reason, didn't feel they could come through the doors of a traditional church building. He's called me to love my community and lead a church there that breaks down some of the normal barriers we see and that enable people with little or no faith to find out who God is and why he's important to their lives. I could easily lose my way and forget what God has called me to do and get carried away with other ideas that sound great or make me look good. But I know that God is at work. And it can't just be one or the other. We can't just be a charity or a church. Our verses go on to speak in terms of some if and then statements. If you care for the need of your people, then your light will break forth like the dawn and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry out for help and he will say, "Here am I." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with that pointy finger and the malicious talk, if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your need in the sun-scorched land and strengthen your frame. If we care for people's social and physical needs, then we will see our light shining and we will see God on the move in our communities. We'll see God answering our prayers and calls for justice, and we'll see amazing things happen. We need to offer true fast. We need to do more than just look holy. Fasting is an attempt to align your priorities with the will of God. And Isaiah is now calling for a fast, but not from food, from affluence, from indifference, from privilege, so that a community of faith might live in harmony with God and be transformed. I've actually seen a noticeable shift in 2013. No, we're a bit past there. Some of those people I've spoken about who have said to me that there can't be a God because they couldn't feed their families, when they started coming to our community fridge, they would come with a grab what I can, as much as I can, and get out quickly sort of attitude because they're owed it. But some of those have started to come to our cafe and ask questions about God, no longer with an axe to grind. They no longer grab what they can and run. They come, they stay, they chat, they volunteer, they feel safe. That they have a regular supply of food. That means their physical need is now being met. And as a result, they're starting to discuss their spiritual needs without me needing to go and force conversations. They're coming to me and asking, what's this about? In some cases, they've been coming through to our Faith Around the Campfire sessions or coming to stand. I work in the kitchen at the cafe, and they'll come and stand at the kitchen door and talk to me whilst I'm frantically trying to make paninis and hoping they don't see the mess that is behind the counter whilst I try and put it all together. If we meet their physical needs, their social needs, then our prayers will be answered. Then they will come and discuss their spiritual life. The verse today finishes with, "You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will rise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets and dwellings." For me, these verses are a really powerful reminder that we need to be in our communities, caring for the needs of them. We need to be caring for both their spiritual and physical needs. We're surrounded by broken people who need the life-changing message of Jesus and need feeding or clothing or support dealing with addiction or debt problems. They need people to stand for them, to stand with them, to advocate with them, to be there with them in their daily struggles. I want to encourage you today to be people of God who turn your face towards those in need rather than away, who actively step into the marginalised spaces and go out of your way to provide for them, whilst also being people who stand firm in the promises of God and share the life-changing message of Jesus with those you meet. Because we need to be doing both. It's not an either or. It's together as we serve our living God and our communities. I don't know about you, but I look at my community and see a lot of broken walls and streets that need restoring. I would love it if someone one day said of me that I was a repairer of broken walls and a restorer of streets with dwellings. And I can honestly tell you I get this wrong a lot, and I'm talking to myself right here, probably more than I'm talking to you. This isn't me coming and saying, "Come on, Budley, put some effort in." I don't know what you guys are doing. I'm not here. You might be doing all of these things. You might be sat there going, "All right, yeah, we get it. finish up, off you go. And if that is the case, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to be making you feel like that. What I want to do is encourage you, encourage myself to make sure that we've got our priorities right. To make sure that we take a moment to stop and go, okay, what am I doing? Am I just a charity? Am I just a church? Am I neither? What is God calling of me right now? Because what I'm seeing is whilst we seek to readdress what God is doing and readdress the way we focus as the wave, we're seeing God moving in exciting ways that I'm super excited to be a part of, because it all happens without really me putting the effort in. I'm not doing wonderful things in Littleham. God is doing wonderful things in Littleham. I've been trying for 4 years to build a community garden, and I've not managed it at any point until this year. Someone came to me and said, hey, we heard you want to build a community garden. We'd like to do a project. Could we build it for you? And we'll give you some extra money, and we'll do it all in one day. I was like, oh, I've got a grant that if I don't spend by April, I've got to send back. Well, that's all right. We want to build it on the 1st of April. Oh, this is weird. It's like God sort of knows what he's doing. We just need to join in with what he's doing. And he's going to do the rest, and incredible things happen. I'm going to, again, stop waffling, but let me pray as we draw to a close. Father, I thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the lives of each and every one of us. I thank you that you care about the tiny details in our lives. You care about the big details in our lives. You care about the struggles we're going through. And I thank you that you place people around us to stand with us through those times. Father, I pray that you would help us be people who look outwards to our communities, who aren't just religious people who turn up to church on a Sunday and then go home and carry on our everyday lives as if nothing's changed. But instead, we are people who are hungry to see you working, who are going to stand with those around us who are in need, whatever their need might be. And that you'll then put us into situations where we can have those incredible conversations, even the conversations where someone says, oi, what are you talking about? God can't love you. God can't love me. Lord, I pray you put us in those places and give us the words to say as we spend time with people, as we connect with the broken. I pray that you would help us to be repairers of broken walls, and whatever the other bit was in the verse that I've forgotten. Lord, thankfully you know what it says and I can't find it. Restorer of streets with dwellings, thank you. Father, go before us, speak to us, and lead us into the places where you want us to be, both socially, both physically, and spiritually, Father. Amen.